the county add-on from years 2 and 3 to all in year 1 actually makes a lot of sense. And so that's something that we
I think it'd be helpful, in my opinion, if you were to define participants of a network. In other words, if I'm going to host a network in Santa Cruz County, who am I inviting? Is it consistent with what LA is doing? I mean, is it 5 parents? I mean parents or NGOs or districts. I think it would be helpful as we move forward and try to have some fidelity across state. If you can just sort of, it could be general, but you expect these individuals to participate in the host network. These types of individuals. Okay.
So let me ask a question about that. So some counties we've talked to want it to be their district superintendents, and some want it to be because they're varying sizes or issues. Some want it to be teams, and some want it to be the LCAP lead. Others have talked about actually working with principals because the rubrics will drill down to the school site. So when you're suggesting sort of defining participants, it's a clear but broad sort of definition that would potentially include, all of that, but sort of would be flexible enough to allow each county to sort of mix and match as they wanted to. Is that
fair enough?
Okay.
Josh, just a couple of things. I am an anti-educratese person, so I hope that we can use very clear language. And I think that professional learning communities is a term, I'm looking around, that people understand. You did a great job of explaining how long they've been around and the research that backs them up. And, it's very good practice for continuous learning. So I might sort of err on the side of using professional learning communities instead of networks. I have to say I'm not entirely clear what the weavers are doing. Again, that's sort of a term I don't know what that means. I know what weaving means on a loom and all of that, but I don't know for sure what it means in the context of professional learning communities. So I want you to help me understand that a little bit. And just to your point a minute ago, I want to opt for as much flexibility as possible because I'm all about the local people knowing what they need to do locally. And so if a county or an association, CSBA, Access says, we want to work with principals around English learner needs, I get that. And they have very specific needs in those local communities. So I really want to allow for that. So thinking about that a little bit, if you've got a lot of very diverse professional learning communities, I don't know quite for sure what this aggregation of what you're calling weavers, what that does. And how you make that work. It seems like you might be creating an initiative that will be really tough to pull off. So I just want to know a little bit more about it.
No, thank you. So let me pull up my Weaver page here. There we go. So initially the proposal, which was just the grassroots network, it contained no linkage between a network in one part of the state and any other. And the concern was that based upon our experience so far with LCFF, that there's been some really remarkable success stories, whether it be through groups that are working together or great outreach or interesting ideas for actions and services, but they tend to be siloed. And it's difficult to sort of spread the word about what's working well and sharing that information. And so the initial impetus for what we eventually called the Weavers, and I'm more than happy to take a different name. That was a suggestion, the idea of sort of weaving things together. But the value we think is that some facilitators may be very good at facilitation. Some facilitators may benefit from talking to other facilitators and learning what's working there around getting buy-in and commitment and changing practice and culture in a neighboring network. So one of the values we think is providing direct, concrete support to the facilitators themselves to really make the grassroots networks work well. The second thing we've seen, and I've had the privilege and pleasure to visit Riverside and Trinity, not on the same day, different days. And what I found was that some districts in Riverside are struggling with recruitment and retention of teachers, such that they're flying across the country to recruit teachers. And when I visited Trinity, very different community, very different geography, they're also struggling with recruitment and retention of teachers. Now, we don't know whether they can learn from each other, but they haven't tried because there currently is no way for a superintendent at, pick a district in Trinity, I don't want to call anyone else, I won't say it, and a district in Riverside. But if you have the county-run networks for those facilitators participating in a Weaver network, I'm from Riverside and I say, man, I got this district that's really struggling with recruitment and retention of teachers, particularly as it relates to, these really hard to fill top subject areas. Well, the Trinity County facilitator who's in that Weaver network can say, you know what, I got a district in my county that's actually had some success. Offline, let's connect those superintendents. So it allows for sharing of information that no structure that we're aware of right now allows for. Another sort of benefit, and I think there are a number of examples, but let's just say that once the rubrics roll out, there is continued challenges with understanding the college and career indicator, just to pick an example. The Component 1 trainings will be going on. The Component 2 trainings will be going on. But it may be that we want to have deeper conversations around the CCEE and how it really is intended to be understood and drive decisions. Sorry, College and Career Indicator. Thank you. I'm a board member, too. I should know these things. And so we could, for example, the CCEE, in collaboration with our partners, could put together some content that would then be distributed through the Weaver networks, and not just here's a piece of paper, go forth, but let's, at our Weaver network meeting, discuss how we think this content should be used and modify it to the needs of our unique demographic or participants. And then those grassroots facilitators go forth and provide that content in a individualized way to the local needs. To your point about how we're going to sort of group the grassroots facilitators together, that's something we've had conversations about. And initially the thinking was, let's group all counties together. Let's group all, associations together and nonprofits together. And I think there will be some value to that. I think there's also some value in exploring Weaver networks that integrate different types of networks so that you have grassroots facilitators who can see and hear the perspective of different types of entities. And so we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet. And I think mainly we're holding off because it depends upon the numbers. In terms of how many counties there are, how many non-counties there are. And so we haven't, at this point, thought to include that level of detail in the plan. But if the board so directs, we're happy to sort of put together some thinking around that to sort of illustrate how it might work.
So I really appreciate the explanation. That helps me understand. But I'll just go back to, as somebody who's been around like way too long, probably in education policy, we've seen work like this go on before. I'll go back to the collaboratives, the pre-K higher ed collaboratives, which the intent is fantastic. You want to get everybody coordinated. But to your point, when you look at research, and we had a presentation here a few months ago, the ones that are the most successful are doing specific work. They're saying, we're trying to improve outcomes in algebra. We're trying to reduce our dropout rates. This work around the professional learning communities needs to be organized around what the 8 state priorities are and ultimately what the standards are in the evaluation rubrics. So I encourage you to keep focused on what's the work, what are we going to be asking LEAs, charters, counties to do, because I think it's super easy to get caught up in the process, and the process becomes the work, and it can't become the work here. So that's just my caution. When I look at the budget, I see and I appreciate that the amount that's allocated initially to this second tier of professional learning communities, I might want to call them the knitters or the crocheters, but it's much less relative to what you're doing for the specific PLCs, which I really appreciate. So, and I like the early adopter notion. Maybe we'll learn more about it. But again, just my caution is, really try to stay away from the process and focus on what they're trying to do at the student level, at the LEA level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just also observing and asking the question, how do we link the proposals to work, the investment you're talking about here, with the pilots under 3.2? So looking at how do we tie them together, what are the cross links and feedback loops as the other pilots get launched and move ahead?
So I think that both the component 2 trainings and the component 3 trainings would be existing vessels to sort of do I'm sorry, you're asking about the relation with the pilots. Sorry, I'm confusing 3.2 and 3.3.
Yes.
So in terms of the pilot, so the pilots, and I don't want to speak for my colleague Ms. Molina, but the pilots will be doing deeper work, really integrating with the LEAs that we're working with. This is much more sort of, systemic. And so to the extent that there is a need for a pilot for there to be, specific training, we would be all for that in terms of whether it's through a local trainer, through a county office, whether it's having everyone attend a component 1 large-scale workshop, or whether it's through networks. I mean, I think we would be more than very interested in however supporting the pilot work that was being done.
Great. Thanks.
I think maybe one last question for you. I agree with Tom. I think this should be aligned with the pilots, however you can do that. Now I forgot my question because I thought about Tom's over there. Number one, the budget. There's no breakdown on the budget, so why don't you tell me where that $5 million or $3 million is going to go? For the networks, I don't have a detailed budget. What was your anticipation? Would that be personnel or the budget? Yeah.
So the estimate of $75,000 per network comes from the sort of the estimate that one facilitator would require about a half FTE time per network. So a county office could a full-time person for 2 networks. That's not a fixed number, but that's sort of our best guess at how much we think being a good grassroots network facilitator would require. And so approximately $75,000 for a half-time position, including all of the salary and benefits. At this point, the proposal would be a contract with the host, so say county office. We would simply pay them, and that entity would employ or contract with the facilitator. Does that answer your question?
That's fine. How many networks are you anticipating? This seems like a lot of networks if we break
Well, I would say that we don't want to overpromise, but in year 1, we would imagine around 50. And in year 2, around 50, and in year 3, 75. We've put aside some contingency funds, thinking that we can get more. We would love to get more if the desire is there.
One last thing, I promise. What I would ask
this is way easier than the input session. So this is
okay.
ask away.
What I
This
would
is good.
ask you to do, because you've received a lot of feedback from the CCE board today, as you revise this document, I'd ask you to submit to the board in advance so we can give you feedback before the October meeting. And in other words, you got a lot of stuff going on here today and took a lot of information. So I think it's best if we have a chance to preview the materials and give you feedback before October. Thank you.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agreed.
I think you have a few more sections, Josh,
do.
right, to talk about.
I do. Anything else on component 3? Okay. No, really, this is easier than any of the input sessions, so don't feel like you have to hold back. All right. Component 4, advice line. So this was an idea that arose out of the input process. CDE already has an email account that responds to LCAP-related questions. This component would expand on that to also respond to rubrics-related questions. Staff from the 4 entities that I mentioned before would sort of vet the answers, and it would sort of go more towards this alignment across the state in terms of providing responses. We would want a position to sort of ensure a timely response and to log the questions so we can actually look at what's being asked, maybe turn them into FAQs. And there already is a very robust FAQ, but maybe expand on that. So that's the basic idea for this. Pretty basic budget for this, and it's pretty rudimentary at this point. That'd be the idea. Questions regarding component 4?
Just to be clear, who would be doing the advice line? Because as you said, the department's already got quite a robust effort around FAQs and keeping things up on the website.
Yeah. Certainly, we haven't sort of worked that out yet. At this point, the likely lead would continue to be CD. They have the email address, but it would, the answers would be vetted sort of and worked on collaboratively, and we'd have to, once the nuances of the sort of staffing got worked out, but at this point it would be CDE that would take the lead. Okay. So just want to very quickly focus on evaluation and budget. We would be doing surveys before, during, and after each component, including the SB 828 required survey mentioned before. Also, we'll be doing focus groups. And what we'll be looking at is whether the participants, what their perception is of how the 4 components are working or not working, the pertinent LCFF topics, and then, of course, the change in content knowledge. That is the key piece, is are we actually providing the training, and is it sticking? Are the people doing the work on the ground really understanding the template, understanding the rubric, and eventually seeing these not in and of themselves, but as tools for continuous improvement?
Who do you envision being on the focus groups?
Participants of the networks, participants of the local trainings, attendees of the workshops, possibly local trainers themselves, depending upon what we're looking at measuring, but for the most part, the recipients of the information. So this is the budget. It's a little bit less than $2 million. And, trying to model continuous improvement, this is, a fundamental piece of our work, is to see how we're doing on a regular basis and modify our practice, just like we're wanting all LEAs to do, so that we can actually provide the content and the training better. So this is a summary of all of the 4 components, plus the evaluation, plus some additional costs, including staffing and website, and it comes out to be $20 million over 3 years, just as we were given. Any questions?
I guess I'm going to, just to be clear for folks who are in the room, when we wrap this up, then I'm going to call for public comment on this section, item 3.1. So in case you haven't signed up yet, be sure that you do that. But one question, and you mentioned this, and I think Tom mentioned it too, is the county office add-on piece might be moved up into the earlier phase. If that's done, at least for my purposes, I would like to see the total funding that counties receive to provide support for LCAPs, because I know last year budget, counties got $40 million to spend over 2 years to support LCAP review and things related to that. So while I don't know whether counties need additional funding for this purpose. I just want to make sure that the conversation is nested in the overall picture.
Okay, I'll add that. So
Just one last follow-up. I think it's important to roll all this out through the lens of a superintendent or principal. In other words, what's in it for them? Because that's what they're thinking. How can I improve the outcomes in my district? So all this is great, but look at from their lens, from that vantage point. I think that'd be much more successful that way. If you think of it. Okay.
I had a superintendent one input session says, "Remember, Josh, this is all about kids," because I hadn't mentioned kids at any point.
Okay.
It's right. I mean, it's 100% right, and we get so caught up in sort of the process and the components and the money that at the end of the day we sort of forget. Like, this is exactly why we're here. So thank you for that.
And actually, just to add on to that, it's all about students, and at the end of the day, students in their classroom are going to get instruction from teachers. Mm-hmm. And where the real results are is where that teacher, he or she, how they deliver the content and what strategies they're utilizing. And one of my overarching concerns is I read through the reports and everything, is it really didn't reference teachers at any point. And, maybe that was just, an omission, but they were not mentioned. They were not referenced. The other thing is with the 8 priority areas for the state, there's a larger role for classified employees, probably larger than before under the old structure. When you talk about some of those whether it's around attendance or whether it's around nutrition. So, I think we're missing two really key stakeholders. Maybe we're not missing them. Maybe they've been part of the input sessions. Maybe they've, at the staff level, maybe that engagement's happened with CTA and CSEA. But I think it's really important, in addition to the site administrator, engaging AXA. And I know a lot of engagements happen with CCESA, and more of that needs to continue. That's the critical piece, because obviously COE, county offices and county superintendents are called out in the original legislation to begin with. But let's not forget the site administrator, the individual teacher, and the classified employee in every level of these networks and trainings and everything that we do. And again, it's all about the kids. It's all about the students and what they're doing to impact student achievement.
I appreciate that very much. And certainly they have been involved in the input process and have given very good input. And the final plan and the corresponding documents, including early adopters, are likely to include some reference to just what you're talking about. Yeah.
So these are the questions that you put up in the at the beginning of your presentation. I think before we go to next steps, because I think it would be helpful to be informed by the public comment, and then we'll wrap up with next steps, if that makes sense to folks.
Would it be helpful, Madam Chair, if I, at some point, gave my understanding of the answers to these questions from the board's feedback?
Yes, it would be.
Okay. Should I do it now or after the comment?
No, let's do it afterward, because we're trying to wrap up and do next
I'm going to go grab some water, and then I'll come back.
So I'm looking for public comment on item 3.1, the CCEE LCFF Professional Development Training Implementation Plan. Can you call the folks who are signed up for public comment, please? And as she calls your name, if you just want to line up, and just a reminder that it's 2 minutes per speaker. Is that it, or are there other on 3.2? I just assume you call them up so they can be lined up, and we'll click.
Shelley Coleman, Peter Birdsall, Jamie Massalone. And that's it for 3.1.
Okay, thank you. Hi, David.
Hello. Thank you very much, Chairman Byrd and members of the board. My name is David DeLuz, and I'm with the California School Boards Association. And first of all, on behalf of Vernon Billy, our Executive Director and CEO, I just want to first of all say thank you for this opportunity to begin this process of really getting out in the field and being able to provide some support to all of our members around the state. We really believe that school board members have a really important role to play, and so we're really looking forward to engaging in this process and continuing our work in trying to find ways to help board members understand more clearly their responsibility in implementing their local control accountability plans. We participated in all three of the input sessions, and we were very pleased, I think, as an organization with the direction of the CCEE in rolling out this training plan. I did want to just hopefully get some clarification today around the idea of the early adopters. I know Josh had mentioned that there may be some counties that are interested in being early adopters. I would hope that there would be an opportunity for any organization that is willing and able to perform as an early adopter to also be eligible to apply in the early round. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I think Josh and Dr. Cohn's team is doing a really good job, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you.
So next is Erica. Sorry, we sort of surprised you. I know that we're doing... I think Mr. Ford is next, and we're doing the 2-minute timer as well. So welcome.
Yes, Doug Ford from Solano County Board of Education. I'm trying to come up with a metaphor about what's happening here. But I think if we were going to construct a human body, one thing we would design for it would be a skeleton. And that's what we have here. But we don't have all the rest of the parts of it. And that's what's so important to do. And the term pilot project has been used, and it's very important. But we do have a pilot project already. It's been written about. It's the Long Beach experience during the 1990s, up to while Dr. Cohn was there, and how they did it. And I've mentioned the strategic planning, which education doesn't seem to know what it is. But this contains a strategic plan, even though the term isn't used there. It's based on a strategic plan that was worked out there. So I think it's necessary for everyone to read this book that Dr. Cohn was a major participant in producing. And not only the book, but the things that made the success at Long Beach possible. Thank you.
Good morning. Shelley Spiegel-Coleman, Californians Together. First of all, I do want to thank the staff of the CCEE and for the many opportunities that people have for input. And we participated in almost every kind of opportunity that there was. And so we really appreciate the multiple venues for providing the input and the great dialogue that we had in that process. And clearly the work that we've done with the department also in this area has been very, very important. A couple of things. I think the question that Superintendent Watkins asked about who's going to be developing the content of the training was a key question for us. And the response were very important players. But if we're going to try and get a broader audience, as Chairperson Byrd talked about, involved in this whole process, being part of the planning of the content and what is going to be delivered, I think is an important place for all players to be a part of, because they will then be coming to the trainings, but they'll have had no input in it. If they have input, there'll be a much better buy-in. So I think the teachers,
1 minute remaining,
so on and so forth, we very much would like to be a part of that process. We've done a lot of work across the state in terms of professional development, and we'd love to be a part and help you develop the work that's going to be ongoing. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Martha Zaragoza-Diaz, representing the California Association for Bilingual Education, and just 3 points. First of all, I'd like to thank staff for the very inclusive process they've taken in terms of providing or seeking input from the public. We're very pleased and encouraged to see that for components 2 and 3, in addition to the county offices of education, you will take a look at other statewide organizations or nonprofit organizations as part of those components. I would really, really strongly encourage you to really take a look at that. CABE has been involved in providing input. We have a lot of experience in providing professional development to LEAs on the issues of English learners, especially with regards to academic instruction. That's not just on bilingual education, but overall. And so does Californians Together. And we would like for you to consider, again, organizations such as EdTrust West, CABE, and Californians Together, and others who have experience with working with LEAs in specific subgroup areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Birdsall, Executive Director for CCEE of the California County Superintendent's Educational Service Association. Like everybody else, I want to express our appreciation for the extensive input process, and I want to thank Superintendent Torlakson for asking the question about the letter we had sent, and I want to thank Josh for his response to saying it made a lot of sense. That's, for us, all good, so appreciate that. I would like to say that as we work with the board and staff, we think it's really important that be available, get off to a strong start with all the school districts in the state, so not just selected districts. Every district has to use the new template. Every district needs to use the evaluation rubrics. These are big ideas we're talking about: multiple measures, continuous improvement, an aligned state-federal accountability system. Our experience so far, we're all new in this process, but having those conversations in context for that district about their data and their LCAP is where you get the most significant, sort of push or jump or whatever you want to call it. And I think we all want to get off to a strong start on that. So
1 minute remaining.
So we would urge that it be for all school districts, and we'll be happy to work with you on that. So thank you.
Good morning, Martha Albers. I'm with ACSA, the Association of California School Administrators. Similar to the other speakers, we're very thankful to the staff for the extensive efforts to solicit input across the state over the past month. We're very pleased to see that the draft proposal incorporates many of the comments provided at those input sessions. We ACSA provided input, particularly around the quality control and ensuring that the trainers are significantly prepared to provide the training so they're valuable to the local school districts, LEAs in general, the local stakeholders. And then the other piece too is regarding consistency. We want to ensure that there's the same message happening across the state when we provide these trainings. To that end, we encourage the CCEE to add 3 additional locations at a minimum. So right now there's 5 proposed. We think there should be at least 1 in the Bay Area, San Jose area, perhaps 1 in downtown LA, in central LA, given how many school districts are in the LA area, and then also perhaps 1, let's see, there's another one, in the Santa Barbara Central Coast area, just for the access for the Central Coast districts. We at ACSA also stand ready to support the CCEE by providing an online training. We have a partnership with Cisco so that we can provide web online tools across the state. We appreciate the comments made by several of you regarding the remote districts so that they can also be participants and have access. So we make ourselves available to support that work. We also want to make sure that the work really focuses on the networks regarding what is a real purpose. Mrs. Burr mentioned that the real focus should be on the 8 priorities for LCFF. We don't want to lose sight of what is the purpose of these networks and ensuring that they're doing the right thing at the local level. And then I think one clarification that needs to be made, there was a lot of interest about the quality of the trainers. It was mentioned as an individual. It's likely that the CCE will be contracting with actual entities, not the individual trainers, so there needs to be some clarification regarding that. And then lastly, it's important to have information about the early adopters. We at ACSA are interested in perhaps being considered as an early adopter, so we appreciate more information from the staff regarding that. And any information that becomes available to the public is really important that it's timely so that we don't just let school districts or other stakeholders know 2 weeks before any trainings in the fall. Thank you.
Good morning. Molly McGee Hewitt, Executive Director of the California Association of School Business Officials. First of all, we would echo Peter's remarks with regard to CCESA, and we support the role that CCESA has taken in this in their interest. We would like to commend your staff for their hard work and collaborative manner. Our staff has been participating in the outreach sessions, and we really feel good about what was presented to you and that our comments were taken into consideration. We support the collaborative's direction that ensures that school districts, county offices of education, and community stakeholders have access to workshops beginning in the fall to understand the purpose and use of the evaluation rubrics. We also strongly support the professional development be front-loaded in the 2016-17 school year, as the learning curve will be especially steep in the first year. School districts and county offices of education will need to understand how to use the evaluation rubrics to analyze and assess their student data in order to change or modify their LCAP goals and strategies.
1 minute remaining.
We look forward to working with your staff and the collaborative as a partner to ensure that our members have the tools and information necessary to understand how to use the evaluation rubrics for continuous improvement. CASBO will cooperate with you in any way. We will make time available at our annual conference, at our CBO symposium, on our online and any of our networks to try to make sure that your work is successful and that we're in cooperation with you. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jamie Musalimas, the County Superintendent in San Joaquin County. And first, I'd just like to thank Josh and commend him for coming to our county, and he met with all of our superintendents and their staff and just did an excellent job in giving an overview of CCEE. I very much appreciate it. I just want to speak to the component 2, this next rollout of the rubric training and support, and really encourage the board to fully fund that and fund county offices of education in doing that work. Chair Burry mentioned the $40 million that counties got. That was significant funding. I just like give you an example of how we use that in San Joaquin County effectively. When I started in 2015, the 2014, excuse me, and the 2014-15 school year, we had assigned LCAP support and approval to existing staff in our County Office of Education, and they worked extremely hard in implementing that. But as I went around in my first year and talked to all of our superintendents and asked them for honest feedback, I got a lot of criticisms of our county office and how we were supporting them in LCAP.
1 minute
When we got that funding, we hired 2 full-time people, a full-time curriculum instruction person and a full-time business person, and it completely transformed our relationship with our districts and made that process, rather than one of simply oversight, to one of collaboration and support. And we couldn't have done that without the proper funding. And to now add more things on to that staff would be counterproductive in my opinion. And I think our example at our county office is very typical of what's going on in the state. I think everything that we do as a county office and with our districts always comes back to relationships. And relationships take time because districts are independent. They have their very qualified staff, and when people come in from the outside, they're initially wary, and you really have to convince them that you have their best interests in mind. And I think if we really believe that this process is going to improve student achievement and specifically targeted children and to close that achievement gap, then we have to make sure that we fully fund it. So I really encourage the board to do that. Thank you.
Okay, Josh, time to wrap it up.
All right. Thank you for everyone who said such nice words, and it really has been a very valuable process for us at the staff level in terms of hearing the feedback, and I think it, as I said at the beginning, made for a much better plan. Going to these 4 questions, really the first 2 are the most important. Is the board comfortable with the 4 components of the draft plan? My understanding is that generally the answer would be yes, that there isn't a request to delete any of the 4 components or to add any new components. But that being said, want to make sure the plan focuses on teachers, students, and in particular that this is all about working with unduplicated students, EL students, foster youth, students from low-income families. There's definitely an interest in wanting more information on quality control, so who it is who is providing the trainings, how are we ensuring that the content is proper, and then the point that Chair you made about sort of the weavers, not so much that they can't be in there, but remember that the PLCs work well when there is a specific focus, and in our case, that's on one of the 8 state priorities or multiple priorities. And then how does that apply to the weavers? So that was the major takeaways on basically points 1 and 3, which is any additional details in the plan. My understanding component 2 is that generally the budget is you're okay with the exception that we would be moving the county add-on from component 3 to the first year of component 2, and that the budget would include an explicit set of expenditures directed at county offices in that final report. Did I miss anything or get anything wrong?
Any comments, questions about that? It sounds like you captured it, at least from my perspective. Michael?
Yeah, again, I think you did. I think, again, we'd like to see a draft of the revisions prior to a rollout in October.
Yes.
So we can give you feedback if we need. Okay, thank you, Josh. Very nice presentation.
Thank you. And then just very quickly, next steps. So the state board meets September 8-9 to approve the rubrics and the template. We have our governing board meeting on October 6th, and then we would submit the plan the next day. On the 6th, depending upon the details of the plan, there may be included additional items such as contracts that would be asking for board approval as part of the adoption of the final plan, so that we could get going as soon as you say go, we would get going.
So this is, I have a couple of just general comments. I don't know if we're moving on entirely from this item. I did have a few general comments, but one of my issues specifically with the timeline is the implementation plan comes to us on October 6th, but we have to submit to the legislature the very next day. And my concern is and I pose this for the board members and the consideration of, maybe needing to look at a special meeting in September. And the only reason is I'm almost going to feel compelled, and not that I don't expect staff to come back with a plan that I could say, yes, that looks great, let's implement. But if I do have concerns on the 6th, I'm almost going to feel compelled to support it anyway, because the legislature, we got to get this to the legislature, or we're gonna as a board have to edit from the dais, and that's never a good place to be in. So, not that we're gonna choose the date at this time, but I would like to throw out for board consideration that perhaps we have a September meeting a couple weeks before October 6th, just so we can, maybe look at this, implementation plan. I just don't like the feeling of having to be under the gun to absolutely approve something that goes to the legislature the next day.
So let me try an alternative, Tim, and see if this works, because I share your same concern that if we don't see anything between now and October, it's going to put us in a difficult place. So one thing I had suggested to Carl was that similar to what the state board does is that we actually receive a written draft via a posted memo on our website that everybody gets to look at. We get to look at it at the same time. And that the staff sets up a formal feedback process. Okay. It can be online. We could do a conference call. There's different ways to do it, but that it's not just we discuss it today and then we expect to vote on the 6th. That I would like to ask the staff to set up a formal process by which they will be sharing their next final draft, if they will, but still seeking input, not just from us, but from the folks who are interested in doing that. So is that an alternative as to a meeting? I'm not opposed necessarily to meeting, but it does work well for the state board. If you look at all of our memos, we get tons of memos that happen in between our 2 meetings. It gives everybody an opportunity to see it and also ask questions and provide feedback.
Actually, I think that's a better alternative. I think that addresses my primary concern is, that, and I think when you put it out there, whether it's on, the web and allow, the public, because it's a public document, and we've heard from several key stakeholders today. We know there's dozens of others that aren't here that similarly are very interested in that implementation plan. So you put it out there, allow interested parties to comment, and more importantly, well, not more importantly, but board members to be able to have that feedback as well ahead of time. So that way, when it comes to the board on the 6th, we can adopt something that has, we've been able to participate in the process. So yeah, I think that would be fine.
I would suggest that, and I think we talked about this date maybe, Josh, that since the state board is adopting on the 9th, that we give you another week, basically, to finalize the draft. So we would get it, I think that's the 16th, somewhere along those lines. And then there's a couple-week process for input before it actually has to be posted. We have to post 10 days before our meeting anyway. So I don't want to get too much into the details, but that would generally be the timeline if that works for folks. Tom?
It sounds good to me as well. I do want to ask any guidance from council so that if at the posting we as individuals see something we'd like changed, we would, I think, give input back to Carl by a memo or some means so that Carl could, hear and be prepared to respond to a concern that a board member may have. But we may have three concerns different from the board. Under the Open Meeting Act, how can we react to the draft plan and give input to staff so they can see where our concerns might be, if there were any concerns with the draft?
I think that there's a concern, and I'm not sure exactly how the state board. Oh, I'm sorry, Davina Harden. I'm Assistant General Counsel for the CCEE, and I'm not sure exactly how the state board does the memos and the input, but under, it's kind of information only really on a posting on the website, and if all the board members or a majority, a quorum of the board members are all providing input and sort of keying off each other and responding to each other, we have an open meeting issue. And so,
if we don't key off one another, though, if we just respond to the draft without responding to Tom or Tim.
to staff, and then staff is
right.
making.
Without identifying who.
Yeah,
Just
staff
staff.
is aggregating, then we're not CCing everybody. Or,
That was how I understood
Yeah.
it. It was
Okay.
just replying to staff.
Right.
Yeah, not to
Okay,
each other.
that's okay. I understood what you said to mean like a conference call or where you're all talking to each other, and so if it's just obviously, in getting the information out to the public, and so Josh would also be looking at what the public had to say as well as individual board members and making revisions, then I think that would work.
Okay. So I think just in terms of direction to staff, is to establish a formal process that has a timeline, says when it will be posted publicly, tells board members how to communicate in a way that is consistent with Bagley-Keene, and also provides for input from stakeholders. That's what we're looking for, and then we would expect to see a final draft shortly thereafter, mid to late September prior to it, and then it has to be posted prior to our meeting. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
One last comment.
Go ahead.
I think there was enough, it wasn't controversy, but enough concern about the early adopters. You may want to somewhat formalize that process, just so it looks transparent, if that makes sense.
And about who can participate.
About who can participate, whatever. That I think that would be best.
Well, and, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, I think through.
Yeah, no, I agree with the comments about, clarifying the process and who can participate, and looking at that number at 10 and whether that's really hard and fast. I understand the concern potentially from staff. I mean, if you get 100 early adopters, then it becomes unmanageable and you don't have a process yet. But at least the feedback I've been getting is it seems like there's a lot of interest, and there's, county offices, there's interest in some charters, there's interest in some LEAs, and, figuring out, if we can open that up just a bit. And I think that kind of is in line with, although it was kind of in the context of the budget, but, the professional development money. And I know that, we want to roll this out thoughtfully, but there is that desire. And I think several of the speakers spoke to that, 16, 17, those rubrics get adopted on September by the state board, and there's going to be a lot of desire, not only just for the early adopters that have been eager to go for a while, but also on the PD side. So, we may want to look at that budget again. I'm not sure if that's something that we're going to look at today or maybe later in the discussion. But
And just a couple of the last two things I had were, I think this notion about maybe needing additional locations, especially in heavily populated metropolitan areas, where it might be 100 miles, but it's like 5 hours to get from LA to. So just to think about that. And also, I appreciated AXA, but there are probably others that have the capability to do the online. I think we want to do that. The other thing, and I think this sort of goes to where Tim was, that my experience, again, has been that when major initiatives happen in the state, it really takes 2 years to get it to sink in at the local level, just to communicate about it, et cetera. So you might want to build some flexibility in there to say that you need to go beyond the first year. You may need to be doing big trainings for the next 2 years, just at the top level. So just think a little bit about that. I just don't think it's going to be quite as linear as we might all hope. So just to build in some flexibility.
Plan lasts as long as.
Yeah.
Are these on? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the current budget does include annual workshops for years 2 and years 3, but I do think you're right that this is going to be adjusted and certain things elongated, certain things shortened and modified as we go forward for sure.
Tim.
So I just had a couple general comments on things I heard. I completely agree, and I was going to raise the point about the workshops. At least thinking about the 2 population centers, the Bay Area and LA, because you want to be close to where as many districts can be as accessible as possible. So if staff really feels that you want to go no more than 6, because I know that was the kind of the recommendation, 4 to 6, you landed on 5, I would say Bay Area and LA area are 2, and then you do the rest geographically proportioned based off your things. So that I do agree with that comment. There was some other comments that I heard that I agree with about who's developing the content and making sure that there's input by the key stakeholders for the developing of the content, not just the vetting of the trainers, but also before the trainings and the workshops take place, there's an opportunity for interested parties and experts that have proven track records of success in some of these key areas, be it EL, be it foster. They can give input and share their data, their analysis, their best practices, because that can help inform the workshops themselves and the training. So I definitely agree with that comment that was made. You had asked a question earlier about the vetting and just kind of what does that look like, and I think, and I don't want to overly complicate things because there's a lot of great providers out there, but I think at the very least, speaking to Michael's point, where you have, the resume of the individuals or, the track record of the organization, some type of a history, as well as, a letter, doesn't have to be terribly long, but describing what they're going to do, what their outcomes that they're seeking to achieve, their track record of success, just so we can vet them. There are a lot of quality organizations, a lot of quality individuals that can be a part of this, both within county offices and in with some of the key advocacy groups. But I think really establishing that strong vetting process so that we know that the content's been vetted through the input sessions, and also the trainers have been vetted, just through the process. And then last comment, just general comments. I know we have specific questions, but I love the model of professional learning communities. I think that really is important, and I would just encourage again to just dive deeper and Sue used the analogy of algebra. If we're going to focus on algebra, we're going to focus on something like that, getting algebra teachers together within those networks. Those networks of superintendents are great, and networks of a lot of these groups are great, but networks of teachers that teach the content, I think, is so important in some of these areas. And I just think that has to be part of the thought process when we're talking about creating networks. And teachers are already in a lot of PLCs. A lot of districts are PLC districts, so teachers are used to being in these networks, but they're within these PLC networks within their own district, and getting them out beyond that district and really focusing on what they can do to share that expertise beyond, I think is really important. And then I said lastly, but actually I just realized I had another, the timeline for the grassroots network, and one of the things that talked about the RFP being released. I would like to see the draft RFP come to the board, at least so we have a chance to weigh in on that before the RFP goes out. I think that's important. So those are my general comments.
I just would add one last thing, Josh, about the vetting. For you to consider setting up minimum qualifications. And we have lots of experience with that. I know Jeff can help you with this, Glenn can help you with this, that we've done through the department and the board, where there is an expectation that you have provided, 2 years of professional learning, I'm just making this up, or 5, or that you have groups of trainers that do this kind of work that are experienced with adult learners. Because I do think that while we want to allow a lot of flexibility and we want this to be a big tent, the stakes are high here, as you know, and the expectation is high by the legislature and the governor about quality training provided by folks who know what they're doing. So I think thinking a little bit more carefully about what the minimum requirements are, and then in addition, and then how you demonstrate that through resumes or et cetera. But front loading what those minimum qualifications are, I think is going to be important.
Okay.
Okay, anything else for Josh? Okay, I'm going to suggest for the comfort of the chair that we take a break here for until about 11:25, and then we'll come back and do item 3.2, and we'll follow the same process. Dr. Molina, who's sitting in here for Executive Director Cohn, will do a presentation along with her colleague Socorro, and we'll ask questions, then we'll have public input and follow the same thing for item 3.3, just so people in the audience know about the process and how we'll be taking input. But we'll be back at 11:25.
Thank you very much.